Hi, I'm Chad, and this video is to talk about genres of writing, but more particularly reflective writing and how reflective writing differs from some of the other types of writing you might be familiar with. So the other types of writing might be essay writing or report writing, and reflective writing is quite different. I've just finished marking a whole bunch of individual assignments, final assignments from Fundamentals of Leadership, which requires reflective writing, and it builds on a couple of reflective writing pieces throughout the semester. So there's a case presenters report and a balcony observers report, which are shorter pieces designed to report on the processes of consultation that have taken place. And the final piece is a longer piece about the individual's learning throughout the course. It's kind of a summation of their learning throughout the whole course and all of the experiences of the course together. And it strikes me that some people struggle a little bit with the reflective nature of the writing. And that's, I think, because reflective writing is a little bit unusual, a little bit different, and it's not often taught really explicitly and often not required in a lot of courses. So one of the ways of distinguishing between reflective writing and other writing is to think about an adaptive leadership approach, and to think that in some ways other forms of writing, particularly essays, are technical, and that reflective writing provides more of an adaptive challenge. So what I mean by that is that when you write an essay, there's certain structures and formats that you need to go with. Referencing is very important, and the convention of the referencing is very important. You need to formulate an argument in response to the question. You need to be very, very focused on that question. And you really need to set things out very logically and very structurally. In an essay, there are certain things you should put in the introduction. You should have a body. Each body has a main point that logically develops each point, and then the conclusion wraps it all together. So that's a bit of a technical task in some ways. It's a known structure, there's a recipe to it, you do need to come up with your own voice, and there are lots of challenging things about it, but in the way that you write, in the genre, it's kind of a technical writing genre. Reflective writing is a lot less predictable. So in reflective writing, you still need to have a structure, and it still needs to be able your reader still needs to be able to follow it. It still needs to tell a story, but it doesn't have to follow a set structure. It can be quite creative. It can be more creative. It doesn't rely necessarily on those known structures or those recipes. You may have some guidance questions. So in an essay, you have a very fixed question that you need to answer with a lot of focus. In a reflective writing piece, you may have some guidance questions, but you don't necessarily have to answer all of them, or any of them even. You may go off the beaten path a little bit. You may take your own track a little bit. So that's an adaptive challenge. As we know about adaptive work, it's risky. So it's very kind of worrying and scary and a little bit unsafe to be doing that sort of writing. But as we also know from adaptive work, that kind of work is sometimes the most important. Now, the reason we do reflective writing is that there's a lot of research in education that has shown that reflection and reflective writing is a very, very important part of learning because it demonstrates the kind of reflection that professionals need to be able to do in their daily life, in their work and career. So another way of approaching reflective writing is to think about it in terms of genre. So when we talk about genre, we talk about kind of categories or groups or conventions of writing, I guess, in a way. There's two main things that apply when we talk about genre: audience and purpose. So when you look at any piece of writing whatsoever, it may be creative writing, it may be a report, it may be a reflective piece, it may be an essay. Any piece of writing whatsoever can be kind of categorized or understood or discussed in terms of its audience and purpose. Now, this is very important in creative writing, for example. If you're writing a novel, who are you writing it for? Who's your market? Okay, the business of writing is about that. In a university essay or report or reflective piece, these things really matter as well, but in a slightly different way. So who is the audience of each of your assignments? Obviously, your audience is your tutor, right? Your audience may be, in some ways, other students, particularly if they're going to be reading your work or doing a peer review of your work. That might be worth keeping in mind, but mostly it's going to be your tutor, your lecturer, the course facilitator. It might be me, it might be Lois, it may be Damien, it may be Sam Wells, it may be Cullen, it may be a number of people who are going to be marking your work. So what you want to do is you want to think about who's your audience. Now, the audience won't change between different, within the same course, between different pieces of work or different assignments. So you can expect that the reader of your work is reasonably expert in the subject area. They may have their own biases, assumptions, approaches, ideas to the content or to your learning or to what's been going on in the class. They will have a pretty open mind to what you're saying. They'll want to hear some kind of voice, some kind of originality. They will probably expect something around academic conventions, so they'll probably expect you to have done some reading and some research and things like that. But that's all audience stuff. Okay, so that tends to be fairly consistent across different genres of writing. What really differs when we talk about reflective writing, say, versus an essay, is that the purpose of the writing is very different. So the main purpose of writing an essay, and I hope to talk about this in another video, is to answer a question, to be really focused and show disciplined thinking, show lots of analysis and interpretation and in-depth argumentation using evidence, and to try and create a persuasive argument. Now, it doesn't have to be a perfect argument because there's no such thing, but it needs to be a persuasive argument. So it's really about scholarly argumentation. It's kind of a technical thing, using evidence to support your argument and show mastery and expertise, or some mastery and expertise of the field. Reflective writing is very different. You don't really necessarily need to persuade your reader of anything in reflective writing. Although you may do that, that may be a part of it, but that's not the main purpose. The main purpose of reflective writing is really to demonstrate your learning. I mean, I guess you do that in an essay as well, but you demonstrate your learning in a different way. The key word here is reflection. Okay, so really what we want to see in reflective writing is that you've had an experience and you've gone back and you've gone, what does that mean? Well, what does that mean for my learning? What did I get out of that? How did that challenge me? What are my goals? What do I want to get out of this? Did I achieve that? If I didn't achieve that, why? How can I improve in the future? We really want to see that process of thinking, that process of reflection. Because if you're going to be an effective student and you're going to be an effective professional in your field, reflection is absolutely essential. This is one of the things that's common to any profession, any industry, any role whatsoever, that reflection is really important. So you might look at some of the instructions for your assignment, and you might go, what am I supposed to do in reflective writing? What am I supposed to do in these case studies or these case presentations or these individual reports? And we'll have some prompt questions, which will be things like, well, what are some of the experiences that happened? Did they challenge you? What did you learn out of this? What could you have done better? What would you do in the future? How does this apply? How does what you did in the course apply to your experience in the workplace or your relationships there or things like that? And we may then say, but you don't have to answer all of these questions. And that's quite frustrating because you go, but I want to do the right thing. But in reflective writing, it's not about doing the right thing. The right thing is really very subjective. So we want in-depth analysis. That's what we really want. Now, another way of thinking about reflective writing is through the phrase action in reflection or reflection in action. So the idea here is that reflection and action are like the yin and the yang. They're like part of a cycle. They're symbiotic. They're complementary. They're very much based on each other. So the idea is that you have an action and then you go away and you reflect on that and you go, oh, that was interesting. What about this? What am I going to do next time? And then you go and have another action and then you'll reflect on that and then go, oh, what did I learn about that? So that process of really, in a way, getting on the balcony and going to the dance floor is kind of what we're talking about in reflective writing. So in those writing assignments, that's the place where you go, oh, what's this all about? And we're looking for analysis, all right? So analysis is kind of trying to be objective about a situation, taking it down into its component parts, and looking at lots of different, multiple interpretations. So when you're right in the thick of it, when you're on the dance floor, we often default to interpretations and act on those interpretations and everything goes awry. It's very common. We know that from the adaptive leadership literature. But by getting on the balcony, we can go, oh, hang on. What did I actually observe? What is a fact, for want of a better word? What did I observe? And then what are some potential interpretations for that observation? So for example, one of the things you may do is explore lots of different interpretations in your reflections. That's one of the things we're looking for. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you write an assignment that has 38 different interpretations, all numbered and listed, that you're doing the right thing, because maybe that's a technical kind of approach to things. So that multiple interpretations is one way of doing analysis. Breaking problems and issues down into their component parts. That's another kind of analysis that we're looking at. So it's that reflective practice. What's the action? What's your experience? So it's important to talk about your experience. For this reason, we sometimes say in reflective writing, it's not such a problem if you use the term I. People tend to assume that in university assignments, you never use the word I or me or we or anything like that because it's informal or somehow unscholarly or too biased or subjective. That's true of much more formal writing like essays and sometimes reports, but in reflective writing, you can't really do good reflection without talking about yourself, talking about I. And sometimes we talk about how we feel or how we respond or whatever. We still want some objectivity, but it's okay to talk about those things in reflective writing. Another way of thinking about reflective writing is, another model or framework. As we know, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So if this helps you think about reflective writing, it might be useful. There's a thing called Kolb's experiential learning cycle, which talks about you have this process where you plan, you act or experience, you reflect, and then you analyze. So that's a 4-stage process and it's cyclical. You're supposed to go through the whole process like that. So you might take that time to go, well, what am I going to do in this consultation? What's my plan? What do I want to get out of it? What's my purpose? Thinking about the purpose. Then you have that experience. And when you have that experience, you're mindful, you're in the moment, you're fully experiencing it, you're part of it, but also observing it and being as aware of everything as much as possible. And then you'll take that moment to step back, get on the balcony, reflect, ask yourself questions, maybe ask other people questions, do that kind of reflection, balcony work, and then do some analysis and really think about that. Get into a lot of depth and ask lots of questions, do lots of interpretations, bounce things back and forth, do that kind of play. It's almost like a play, that reflection. And then that analysis will lead into another phase of planning. You go planning, experience, reflection, analysis again. So that's the reflective learning cycle. It's like a cycle. So if we're seeing a cycle of this kind of learning, experiencing, planning, reflecting, coming through in your writing, that's the kind of thing we're looking for. There's not necessarily any right or wrong answers with that then. So hopefully that's been helpful. It may have been more confusing than helpful, in which case my job's done. I've done the right thing, and that's kind of how it is. The most important thing is always ask for feedback, ask for lots of questions. If you don't understand the feedback, talk to your tutor about it. Create a conversation through that feedback process. But anyway, I hope that helps you think a little bit more about reflective writing and the types of things we're looking for and the types of mental processes you should be going through when you do it. Good luck. Thanks.